family and everybody just thought I was weird and would ask why bring yoga to the hood?
Mhm.
And now it's like, how could we not?
Welcome back to Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. My name is Reika and I am your host. I hope you're having a lovely day as you listen to this episode this week. Just a quick update. I am still in Cusco, Peru. A couple more days here and I go back to Moyobamba, where I will be leading my second 200-hour teacher training. It's been nice to take a little break from the jungle weather and come out to more cooler, drier climate here in Cusco. I took 1 week intensive private Spanish lessons this week, and that was really fun. I learned a lot, but also felt like it wasn't enough at all. If I can do this intensive Spanish class probably for 1 month, maybe even 2 or 3 months, I can totally see myself being able to speak Spanish much better. But I know even if it was a week, I hope it made a difference. And now it's all up to just me continuing to practice every day and keep reviewing what I learned. So it's been a great experience so far. I've been really enjoying my time in Cusco and really learning to slow down and enjoy simple things in life, which I think I forget when I'm living in Long Beach and I have a full schedule of work. It's kind of nice to still work while I'm here, but in much smaller capacity. So that's been a fun transition for me. So this week I have an exciting interview to share with you. So I interviewed Ja, and I knew about Ja for quite some time. At the time, he was working at a yoga studio that I knew in LA. But during the pandemic, when I was taking Annie Carpenter's 300-hour teacher training modules, I saw that Ja was also taking that same module. So it was online, but we got to meet and we chatted a little bit more. We follow each other on Instagram. And Ja is somebody I knew from the beginning of this podcast that I really wanted to interview. So I was very delighted when he said yes and he agreed to be interviewed for this podcast. I think this is such a special podcast because studio that he is part of, or he's a part owner of now, called the Tree Co-op, is doing such an amazing work out in the community. And it is a studio that I really, really look up to as such a great example. I almost wish more studio around the world and around LA looked at the Tree Yoga and what they do and really try to follow suit on some of the things they're doing. They're such an amazing studio, as well as such a great concept and model of studio. So the Tree Yoga Co-op, you're going to hear Ja talk more about it soon, but it's a co-op. So it is owned by 4 teachers who work there. And before they took over the studio was a nonprofit organization. So they offered a lot of services to the community in South Central LA in a very accessible way. They really brought yoga to South Central, yoga mindfulness. And Ja has been part of this studio from the beginning and later on took over as one of the owner. And I think it's just so amazing. Their story is amazing. The work they do is amazing. What they teach, what they stand for is something I really, really look up to. And I'm just so happy that studio like this exists in LA. And I hope there will be more studios like this out there. And maybe if you're listening and you know of a studio like this in your town that you live in, feel free to reach out to me because I would love to interview yoga teachers from this kind of studio, or even owners from this kind of studio. So at my online yoga studio, I donate every month 5% of the monthly profit from the studio to a nonprofit organization or for a cause. So I do remember during the pandemic, 1 month we decided to donate to the Tree Yoga Co-op because at the time they were looking for a brick and mortar studio space to rent out and to have their studio space back. So I do remember raising money for them. I also did trauma-informed teacher training with another part owner of the studio, Jenny, and I just have so much respect for this studio. I also worked for this studio. This studio has amazing partnerships with the community organizations and cities. So they actually go out to different communities around LA to offer and bring yoga to the community. So one of the programs that I was involved in was that I went to Wilmington once a week to teach a yoga class at their high school. And it was such an amazing opportunity to be able to be part of their staff and to be part of their programs, amazing programs that bring yoga to communities and students who may not have easy access to yoga teachings, yoga classes in their home. So it was such a great experience, and it's a studio that I wish I could get more involved in, but I live quite far from South Central, especially with me not owning a car. So it's a little too far away for me to visit the studios on a regular, but after talking to Ja today, I really want to go take his Soul Flow class on Saturday morning. So let me tell you a little bit about Ja. So Ja is founder and owner of the Tree Yoga Co-op, is an author, philosopher, historian, and computer engineer. During a successful career building a computer network and systems for companies like Abbott, Disney, healthcare partners, and more. Ja began to research the practice of mindfulness through studying history, ancient civilization, philosophy, spirituality, and various religions. His research and study led him to adopt the practice of yoga in 2006, and he wrote his first book on self-responsibility called Sea of Circles in 2010. In 2011, Ja took his first 200-hour teacher training and received his certification with the Yoga Den Health Spa under Lisa Villagomez, and took more extensive training with Just Yoga under Lisa Salners and Damien McVeigh. In 2019, Ja began his 300-hour training under world-renowned instructor and trainer Annie Carpenter's SmartFlow yoga program, and received his 500-hour RYT. Today, Ja works to spread the philosophy of mindfulness, self-responsibility, and social justice through his Soul Flow Yoga, which was established in 2011, as well as his decolonization, history, and philosophy lectures and workshops. Ja's mission is to empower more people through decolonization teachings. Removing the programming of white supremacy is how we can all understand that we are one family, one tribe, one so-called race. So here is the interview with Ja. Welcome, Ja, for coming to join me on the Full-Time Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm so excited that I get to speak to you and get to know you a little bit more today. So where are you joining us from today?
Well, I am joining you from sunny Los Angeles, California, in the home where I was, in a sense, raised. This is I live in my grandmother's house. It's in a sense of my endeavor to come back home, which is sort of what our journey is. And so that I'm living and doing sort of my yoga journey.
Wow. And where in LA are you located?
I'm located in South Central Los Angeles. It's if you've seen the movies and whatever, Boys in the Hood and all that stuff and whatever, that is where I'm from. That was about my time being from South Central.
Okay. And how long have you been teaching yoga for?
Oh, now I've been teaching yoga for just 13 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it was 13 years, 10 years out in South Central. Just 13. Well, actually, it's 11 years now in South Central. I did 2 years where I actually learned, where I first started practicing an hour outside of LA in Corona, where I used to live.
Uh-huh. And tell me how you first got into yoga.
That deep long story. Oh man, I think we know that yoga is kind of this mind body journey, and so I began to start noticing something that I'll say within the mind. I just start recognizing I had a say over my life. I was born and raised in South Central LA. And so story I share all the time is that I sold dope, I gang banged, I kind of ran these streets as a kind of little rockhead, but thankfully I wasn't successful and I wanted to get out and do something else. And so I joined the military and left South Central LA as an adult. And I began to live a life of where um, I was working in Fortune 500 companies. I was having a very successful life, despite the fact that, mom had put me out when I was 17. I only had a GED. And I'm living in Orange County and this very kind of high life that I didn't expect. And it dawned on me that I had a say in my life. And that sort of that moment of insight began to lead me to start researching philosophy. And that's my kind of first entry into yoga and mindfulness of how, we all sort of have a say in our lives, but we don't necessarily take the time out to pay attention, to have that kind of awareness. And so I just started reading different philosophical books and even getting rid of me being an atheist. I was an atheist at that time. And so that was my awakening to this spiritual journey that I'll definitely say of where most people see yoga as asana. I entered it from the philosophical standpoint.
Thank you for sharing that. And were you, like you said, you weren't, asana wasn't the gateway to your yoga practice. So did you start meditation practice early on?
Yes, I definitely started. I think that was my first practice of really kind of getting into meditation, beginning to listen to myself as I was reading different books by just different folks from Power versus Force. That was getting me into the law of attraction to what is that biography of a yogi? There's a what's the Four Agreements? I started coming into reading all of these philosophical books, and they all really pointed to going inward. And it didn't matter what their background was or what their culture was. They were all talking about this, what we know now is this union of mind body. And so it's like even what I teach today is a decolonized yoga, which is that, again, it's indigenous to all of our ancient cultures to do this sort of mindfulness practice. And so meditation, which is the original yoga, is definitely that first thing that I did, I would say, as my practice.
And what got you into more of the physical asana practice?
I laugh because I was a typical male. My best friend, her sister had been doing yoga since I want to say the 80s, if not maybe 70s. Her original teacher was Krishna Char. I'm not so good at saying names, but they'd always talked about yoga and this and that, and I'd always viewed it as feminine. And so it was something that women did. It wasn't something that us guys did. And I had hurt my back moving after I kind of had this insight and I was living this life. I something I may talk about later on is like I began to start forecasting my life out. And so in the midst of forecasting my life out, I moved things around drastically. And in that move, I got into forcing something and I hurt my back. And so I skied and I snowboarded. And I was snowboarding, I think with Colorado or something like that. And I was falling and whatever because my back was really tight and it was really bugging me. And so this guy who was trying to tell me, some better ways to cut and to do some things on the board, I was like, oh man, my back, is tight and it's always messing with me. And, and this brother, was a big dude. He worked out and whatever. And so he was like, you should do some yoga. And I looked like, what? Wait, what did he say? And so he's taking off down the mountain, kicking butt. And I was like, what? And he yells back, do yoga. And it's like echoing and whatever. And so it's like literally that the calling was like right there. And because again, getting me out of my own ego and seeing another male that I respected and whatever say, do yoga, it sort of made me say, okay, maybe I should try this thing.
I see. And how was your first yoga class experience?
it was it was awesome. Me and my wife at the time, we went and did just like a little community class, which was more of a gentle yoga. And so I just got into it to see what it was. It was sort of what I expected it to be, all gentle and slow and everything. But the thing that hooked me was, even though we just, kind of moved a little here, a little there, and we did Shavasana. And after Shavasana, I experienced what I call it was my first experience of being yoga drunk. And so I was like, whoa, why do I feel like high, if you will? I feel this like, this like calm and this bit of like kind of flow. I just felt like good after. And that was like the thing that was like, oh man, I gotta do more of this just in that first class.
Yeah. So you were hooked from the first class and
Yes.
started attending more classes. And when did you start to feel like I want to become a yoga teacher?
Ooh, that's a good question, boy. Because I laugh because the denial of that was so profound. I, you know, I, we was doing that sort of community class stuff, and I was like, okay, this is nice. And now I wanted to really, learn more and get into it. And so I found a studio in Corona. It was called, it is still called the Yoga Den Health Spa. Really, we just call it the Yoga Den. And so that was my first studio. And I began to start going to the studio and whatever. And I am out of shape in the sense of where I never really paid attention to. Like snowboarding was what I did because I just liked to do it, but I had not really grasped the athleticism it truly took to totally get into it. And so as I'm doing yoga, and it's like, my teacher, her name was Lisa. She's one of these like popular teachers. So she's got this full class. And so I'm intimidated by all these people in here, and I'm in the back trying to hide. And just over time, as teachers, we see those people trying to hide. They think they could be in the back of the room and whatever, and they wind up bringing more attention to themselves, at least for us teachers, because those are the ones we care about most. So she just kept focusing on me and getting me to start paying attention to my alignment. And so as my body just began to start feeling great, I think maybe as well as like 18 years, I'll say like after about 5 years of like a dedicated practice, like my back was not hurting like it used to. I'd fired my chiropractor. Then I took my yoga teacher training because, again, as a geek, I just wanted to know more. And so I took the yoga teacher training with no inkling in a sense of teaching, but having conversations in the sense of the philosophy. That's something as within my computer career, people would come and sit at my desk, before I would start work. They would schedule lunches with me. They would fly in from out of the state to have dinner with me so we can have these kind of like philosophical discussions. And so I knew that I wanted to continue to have those discussions, but I didn't know about teaching yoga. And so after I took my yoga teacher training, it was kind of sort of an immediate thing. And I think my teacher also offered it because people were coming to take yoga for the same reason why I took yoga in the first place, which was someone that I didn't expect to talk about yoga, talked about it, which basically showed me that I can do it. And so I got a lot of people that were coming to the studio who were inspired because here they could see this older Black man doing yoga and then doing it at a higher level by the time I reached the 5 years. So I think like most of us after the teacher training, it was a natural thing. And I started teaching the asanas.
So first, initially, you took the training because you wanted to deepen your knowledge and practice and not really had a plan to teach, but eventually you realized that you wanted to kind of teach after your program.
Yes, definitely. I think it's a thing of sharing the practice. And one of the sayings that I have,
Mm-hmm.
which I have to, that's from the Buddha, is if you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think to be a teacher is also to want to help lighten the world, which is the world that you also live in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so beautiful. And how was your teacher training program like? Was it over the span of a few months? Was it a 1 month intensive? Was it weekend? How was the format?
I'm glad you asked me that. The format wasn't intensive, and
Uh-huh.
so it's like even it's what I offer. Um, it was 2 weeks on, and then I think we had a 1 week break, and then we did part two and had another 2 weeks on.
Mhm.
And so it was an intensive, what we would call sort of what we do. We do kind of weekend trainings, and we also do that 1 month intensive.
Mhm. Was there, how many people were in your teacher training program?
Geez,
Mhm.
age now. That's a good question. Jeez. And it's because I've been through so many trainings
Yeah.
now that I'm trying to remember the first one. How many people was in that first one? I kind of want to say maybe eight.
Okay, so it was pretty small.
Maybe eight. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And was
Yes.
it mostly vinyasa teacher training? Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I would definitely say Vinyasa teacher
Yeah.
training. That was Lisa's style.
Uh-huh.
But it was a small community, and it was really, I think it was her first training that she was um, implementing within the studio. And
Uh-huh.
so, yeah, it was small. It was intimate because I think she was also rolling it out, and it was gifted to me.
Uh-huh. Wow.
'Cause
And
I was a dedicated student, so she wanted me
mm,
to go through her training.
amazing. And after you were finished with your training, did you feel like you were ready to teach?
No. No, I mean, well, let me say in a bit of arrogance, yes, I thought that because I was kind of dedicated to my practice,
Mhm.
but I think when you get in the sense of in front of a class, then the no comes screaming in so loud. And then my first class, I want to say two of my senior teachers came and they were a part of it, and I had wrote down my entire sequence. The new teacher, you write down your entire sequence.
Mhm.
And I wrote it down, and 30 minutes in, I was done with everything I had written down. This was in a day with an hour and a half yoga class. And so I'm like, oh my God. So I had to wing it and made it through it. And so there was, I think both answers lived big time after that class. No and yes. Yes, that I made it, and no that I wasn't as prepared as I felt that I needed to be.
Yeah. And I want to know, when you first started teaching, did you start teaching at the studio you received your 200 from?
Yes, I definitely started teaching there. And then because there was a little bit of a shakeup or a split,
Mhm.
I wind up teaching the Saturday class that I teach to this day. And
Mhm.
so it's like 13 years later, the Saturday class that I started teaching because the popular teacher, they left and went to open up their own studio.
Mhm.
And so she had this Saturday class that was very popular.
Mhm.
And then I wind up taking it over. And
Mhm.
I think mainly because I was bringing sort of just me to the class with R&B and hip hop playing. And that was, just 13 years ago, that was still controversial.
Wow. But your students loved it, your music.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's why I call my class Soul Flow, because it's always kind of gone from that thing. And even though in the beginning it wasn't as popular as the class I had replaced, over time, I'll say definitely probably within that 7 months or so, and being dedicated, then the class grew, and
Mhm.
I wind up having a lovely following, which is what made me want to come teach out in South Central Los Angeles.
Mm. Why was it controversial? Was teachers not playing music back then?
Um, it had just got to a point where teachers were starting to play music, but again, the music was still what was thought of to be traditional South Asian music. I can't even talk about all the different instruments, and so it was a lot of kind of chants and things like that. And then there started to be this kind of fusion, I think, as power flows and vinyasa flows started to kind of get more popular. You started to have like kind of rock star yogis and whatever, Shiva Ray and people like that. And so you had like MC Yogi and these different people who started who's God. Oh, it's crazy that I can't remember their names in that way because now I play just contemporary music. But you had these yogis who were kind of bridging the chanting with sort of like an R&B style. Steve Gold, I think, is another one I can think of. And so from there, as I started coming into that piece of it, I was like, why not just play like some Stevie Wonder or, some Marvin Gaye or something like that? And yeah, it was there where people who's like Steve Ross. It was a very popular teacher out in Brentwood. Lisa had took me to, and Steve Ross played just hip hop and R&B, like and raw hip hop and R&B. Like who's that? Russell Simmons would go to that class and take that class, and I was like, man, he get away with it. And I would just like rock out in class, just totally enjoy it.
Yeah.
And he would get all these reviews back in the day of people like, I don't know what that was. And so, yeah, there were a lot of purists, if you will, who didn't appreciate bringing in secular music. That I think because there is an opening that our students get to. And so it's said that we can just be giving back what they're trying to let go of. But I think there's the first 5 minutes for me that's the yamas and niyamas. And then that hour and say 10 minutes or whatever, that's the pranayama and the asanas. And then if we can get into a deep enough shavasana or even that cool down, now that takes us through the other four limbs for me. And as I'm going now into those other four limbs of having you to have the sense withdrawal, the concentration, the meditation, and the samadhi, now that's where the music now begins to change. And there's kind of a conversation about really dropping in words and really talking about the philosophy for me. So I try and respect that aspect to know that people are looking to kind of drop into themselves and let go of that outside world. But sometimes just having fun is a great way to kind of drop the outside world.
I love it. Hearing you speak about your progression of class, it makes me want to take your class. I had to come to your studio and take it. But I want to know about so you started teaching at the studio, you did your teacher training, and you were still working your corporate job. How did you slowly transition to maybe teaching more yoga and maybe letting go of the previous job?
Yeah. Ooh, man. So I'm still working corporate America, and I'm kind of going through this mental change. We had some great documentaries that dropped back in the earlier 2000s. What the Bleep Do You Know? The Secret. And so people really started getting into what we talk about in the sense of manifestation talks. And so as I got all those years ago that I had a say of what was going on in my life, now as I begin to progress, like I said, then when I moved, when I had that thought, I said, okay, if this is true and I have a say over my life, then I should be able to take this now kind of corporate life I had created in Orange County. And I was separated from my wife and daughter at the time. And I was like, all right, I should be able to put these two worlds together. And so that was, in a sense of today, what we would say visioning. And so that was the life I visioned. And 5 years later and whatever, I put that life back together, and now with my wife and daughter, and I'm living now both lives merged. And so I'm like, okay, let me start doing this in this more, kind of directed way. And so I started commanding more money and my salaries and this and that and that and that and this. And so I hit what was a plateau for me, right? Like I just got a GED and I'm hiring and firing people with their bachelors and their masters in computer science and all this. And so I'd hit this plateau of where now I'm having to manage people. So I got into more contract work. And that's where people really start coming to talk with me. And so I was like, all right, well, then I want to have this life of where I get to really kind of talk with people and help people sort of do this same thing. And so yoga and that understanding began to happen sort of around the same time. And I'm now putting up vision boards, manifesting homes, and doing all of this stuff, helping people do incredible things in their own lives. And so I was like, all right, I want to start phasing out of corporate America. So because what I saw now was I was programming and doing computer systems. I wanted to program human systems. And so then I started this slow kind of progression where I wrote my first book. I really started to kind of get into teaching. And now I started to launch this career probably 10 years or 11 years back now. And it was just this slow kind of moving away. And then I opened up my own business. And I just said I wasn't going to go back to computers and it was going to be yoga a bust. And I just kept moving forward to a point to where like I had not been paid to teach yoga. My first years, in the sense of even of being paid, that wasn't any real pay. I'll definitely say that. And so it was really to be dedicated to the practice, and now get to a point to where when we open the studio, then I'd have the following and be able to do teacher trainings that would allow me to get paid. And so it was just joining the studio, being a part of it, and eventually taking it over, that I would say that made me be more full time in it and see myself as only a yogi.
Thank you for sharing that journey. When you were starting to really get into yoga, doing teacher training, start teaching yoga, how did your family or friends or your coworkers, how were they? Were they like supportive, or were they kind of unsure or didn't understand you? How did they react, or how were they?
I think as yogis, we are all these kind of unicorns, if you will. And so, what I found is that it's sort of a kind of a black sheep thing of where you have to be a rebel, if you will, to go against what is the normal. And I've always been sort of a rebel. And then, being in a bit into astrology now and knowing that I'm an Aquarius sun and Aquarius moon, and that kind of rebel spirit is just in me. And so because the life I had already lived was so rebellious, they just like, oh, here he is doing some more kind of rebellious stuff. But people definitely have always looked at me as I've been into yoga is like, what, huh? Even, the word or the feedback I get is people's like, like Rita, who is one of the owners of the studio with me. She is one of my students. And the thing that brought her in was, it was like, what? The yoga teacher is this black man? And so like it's always, I think, this kind of head pop moment. And I'm used to people going, and I even love now because I've had to transition in a way to where, my ego would want to still say computer engineer. Like people, what do you do? Who are you? It's like, oh, I'm a computer engineer. I didn't want to come and say, like, I'm a yoga teacher. And now, as I'm fully into it, I love to tell people, like, yeah, I'm a yoga teacher. And you see the double take. The family and everybody just thought I was weird and would ask, why bring yoga to the hood? Mm-hmm. And now it's like, how could we not?
And it seems like I love the work that your studio is doing. I follow you all on Instagram, and I guess I also kind of worked for the studio because I taught for the high school in Wilmington, but I didn't get to meet the teachers. I wish I was closer so I can be more part of the community. But tell me more about how you got involved with the Tree Yoga Co-op and how it was before the pandemic, and maybe how it has changed since the pandemic.
Ooh, yes. The tree, it started off as Green Tree Yoga Meditation Foundation. One of my yoga sisters who I did yoga teacher training with, in a sense, we talk about manifesting. I said, like, because one, I didn't really see any real money in being a yoga teacher. I kind of worked very high up in corporate America. And so I was like, well, if I was to really do this and whatever, then I would do it for my people. I would go home and give it to folks who aren't able to afford it and don't see it. And so I just said that to my cohort. And one of my yoga sisters, of course, listening to each other, people get really close in teacher training. And she said, hey, I have a friend, just a few weeks or maybe a month or so later, I've got a friend who is going to open up a yoga studio in South Central Los Angeles. And I didn't necessarily believe her. I was thinking like, what? You're going to open up a yoga studio? And so she's like, yeah, that was what you said you wanted to do. And one of the things I believe in is like I'm this geek that talks about the matrix all the time. It's part of even within our teacher trainings. And so within the matrix, there's this thing called follow the white rabbit. This is sort of intuition, this in the sense of us thinking that there's these coincidences. And so I put this out here, and then my white rabbit basically was like, hey, there's a studio being opened up in South LA. And so I'm like, okay, follow the white rabbit. Let me just go there. And if it is so, then I'm going to volunteer my time. And so there was the studio being open. I knew the neighborhood, and I was like, all right, I'm going to teach my Saturday class here. And I'm going to teach my Saturday class exclusively just as this studio to help raise the awareness of yoga. And so that was 2013. And so I started teaching my class out in South Central LA, and it was a nonprofit at that time. The nonprofit was primarily based in Boston or the East Coast. And so as time progressed, we developed a teacher training. Me and Raja, who was the ED of the nonprofit, developed the teacher training. And then because I was still married and some things happened and I had to step away and I couldn't participate in the teacher training, Raja continued the teacher training and I continued to teach. And then some more time went and I decided, let me go back and begin to co-lead the teacher trainings. So then me and Raja began to co-lead the teacher trainings, and I wanted to grow the tree is what I said at that time. It was sort of my project. And so my idea was to change the name, call it the tree. And then Raja was like, well, how about I turn it over from a nonprofit and turn it over to you and some of the teachers. And I was like, great. And that's where the idea of the cooperative came from, where Raja, who was one of the founders, and her partner, Jen, were deciding to get out of it. They turned it over to me, who was the founding teacher, and Rita, who was one of my students, Jen, who was running the studio while Raja had taken a break and I had taken a break. And then Jenna was helping with our teacher trainings. And so we all four basically took on the cooperative, and all that happened just as the pandemic had set in. And so we had already had the idea as I was taking over the teacher trainings, which was to put the studio in a bigger spot because we were outgrowing it. Once the pandemic came in, then it really made all that stuff real. And so we had to close the original studio that was on 83rd and Western. Then we changed it from the nonprofit into the cooperative. And I was teaching the class now just out on the park. And so we were teaching out in the park, and we was doing our teacher trainings online. And now, and that was basically the impetus of the beginnings of the cooperative, of us kind of cooperating to continue things going. So then once the pandemic began to chill out, we actually got our dream studio after a lot of soul searching and some heartbreaks and some buildings that we didn't get. And today, we're about to be in our second year in our, what I call a premier studio. If you see the tree, it's this very beautiful space. And the whole, again, in the sense of visioning, I saw what my original studio was I started in, and I wanted to have that type of community space where people could come and feel like they were at home. And so now it's sort of that, to where even our graduates of our teacher training, whenever I see them, I always tell them, welcome home. And those who are part of the tribe, and then we tell them, welcome home.
I love that story. And I didn't know it was a nonprofit initially, and the original owner kind of passed it on to the four teachers who are now, you are owners of the four of them, owners together? Okay.
Yes, we're four equal partners within the tree, which is what makes it that cooperative. And then we have a set plan that would allow people to become members that have a say over the studio. And as we would open up other studios and things like that, then that's an opportunity for other owners to be a part of the cooperative.
That's amazing. And you don't see I don't see other studios having that model. So I think it's so amazing to see it working and seeing just a different model than what we see typically in LA for yoga studios. So I love that it's very community centered. And
yes.
Yeah. And when you started teaching teacher training before the pandemic and you're continuing on now, how was it like to teach? How is it like to teach a teacher training, first of all, but also like in the beginning, did you feel like you were ready to teach a teacher training? Was it hard to create a curriculum? How's the process of teaching teacher training?
Oh, I think it's like a lot of things in life. If you're gonna do something, then it should be done based off of your knowing where you've been, what you've sort of experienced. And so we'd always endeavored to make the teacher training a real training. And it's like the first one I took, it was free. And it was kind of really loosey-goosey, and it didn't have necessarily the parameters that are in place with Yoga Alliance the way it is today. And so when it came up for us setting up our own teacher training, we kind of already knew what it was we wanted to bring in, especially at that point now. I had been doing yoga for like 7 years, sort of kind of hardcore, if you will. And so we kind of knew what we wanted to bring. And so we had fun putting together the manual, just kind of sitting there and taking a bunch of photos of each other in the different poses and then putting together the curriculum. And I think like anything, the curriculum is something that builds. It starts off and then you kind of go through that first one and you learn from it. And that's sort of how our training has continued, of where it's never really kind of just this set thing. We'll set it up, go through it. We have the reviews, and then it kind of will change based on those reviews, even though I'll say today it's pretty solid in that everything that I knew that I had wanted to do, like I said, to be able to have these kind of deep conversations and help people with their anxiety, right? It's like we think of asana classes a lot of times of where I can talk about things that's done for my back, but I can really talk about of how the training has done so much for students' lives, if you will. We had one student who had breast cancer, and I hadn't really recognized that she had breast cancer. So she's going through and she was missing some classes and whatever. And then finally, towards the end, she said that she was getting chemotherapy, and you're going through the training. And after the training, she traveled and whatever for about a year. And then she began to succumb to her breast cancer. And she'd asked us to kind of come and gather around her of what was going to be her final moments. And so we got together, gathered around her for final moments. Now, it wasn't necessarily her final moments because she wound up having this really great moment that made her feel like, hey, she could fight again. Long story short, she succumbs. And in this, she's sharing how important her teacher training was, because it really taught her how to be present, how to really live now and not be so in the story. And so she kind of have credited us with giving her that impetus to go out and travel, to go out and really live fully, if you will. And so she was crying and sharing how her certificate was more important than her diploma for her bachelor's degree. And that always drives home the importance of the teacher training, of even what it was I wanted to do, which was really help people go into themselves and love the infinite now. That's, I think, the magic of that, of our teacher training, is that it's not of where you're going to necessarily have to go out and be a teacher, but can you really be in love with you now?
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. It's so amazing that the impact and impact you're making to the community and people joining the teacher training, but also people who come to the studio to take classes. And I know teacher training can be a very transformational for a lot of people, but hearing that story really made me value how much impact you and the studio is having. So thank you for sharing that. Do you, when you first got involved with the studio before it became, when it was nonprofit and when it first opened in South Central, how easy was it to bring students in? Were the community ready and they're just coming in, or did you have to do a lot of outreach? And how was it like?
Yeah, it was. It took a bit. It took a bit, definitely. And one, I always have to compete against what was my ego, and then what was that having to build a class, right? So in Corona, where I was living at the time, my class is like 20 people and up from there. So I'm used to a full class and people having fun and, getting these accolades. And so when I come down to Central LA, there's nobody in the studio. It's like crickets, cricket, cricket. And then I might have got one student here or two students there. And I can tell you, like, when I got to a point where I had like two steady students, I was feeling like, I was winning. And so I would definitely say it took a lot of, one, dedication. I'm somebody who, I would drive an hour every Saturday morning to go teach that class. And so I would teach it religiously every Saturday. And we would have, we had a slumlord. So we'd have floods, different things going on where we wouldn't be able to hold class. But I think always showing up and being there, and the outreach of walking the neighborhoods, being seen, being a Black man from the community, really kind of, I think that word of mouth really kind of helped spread. People's like, no, there's a Black guy. Like I said, even some of the teachers that teach in the studio now are my original students. Lauren, who does our comedic yoga, came in to class and whatever, and was like, what? There's yoga here? I think us being on Western, which is this busy street, we had just the letters in the window, yoga. And so people would come by and whatever, and they was like, I saw the word yoga in the window. And so I didn't believe it driving by, and people would come in off the street just to look to see. And so it definitely took, I say, about a year before class got to a point to where it began to be more sort of a regular class. But yeah, introducing the community to it took a little bit.
Yeah. And what about now? Are there yoga studios nearby, or are you the only studio in I don't know, 10-mile radius?
Oh, we're damn sure the only studio in a 10-mile radius. Damn sure. I mean, you can look on Google and see, like, in the middle of South Central LA down there, is the tree. And it sort of sits as an island on its own. Mm-hmm. But I can definitely say today there is in Inglewood, which is still a bit of a ways, but this is just how big LA is, that there's Black Bean LA. That's now Black-owned yoga studio. And Allie was once a student of the Tree and a graduate of our yoga teacher training program. And so I just love pointing out branches, if you will, of the tree, or even leaves that have fallen and now have their own trees, if you will. So Black Bean LA, that's in Inglewood. On the west side on Wilshire, one of the graduates of our teacher training program, Etienne, they do Walk Good LA. So Walk Good LA is this big social movement that kind of sprung out of the Black Lives Matter protest. They started teaching yoga in the park, and that's where I met Marley. And so for me, like this family of where they've opened up their yoga studio on Pico. And so there's more Black and brown studios around that I think have definitely been influenced by us.
Yeah, I love how you said the leaves from the tree, the leaves have fallen. That's I love it. And it's so beautiful to see the work that your studio does. And what about, I'm kind of hopping topic again, but going back to teacher training, what do you think is about your teacher training that is different or maybe special? And what are some core values that you try to present in your teacher training?
Ooh, man, I'm trying not to get emotional. I think the definitely thing that we bring to our teacher training, I know I bring to the teacher training, is that I'm from here. And so this is like truly coming home and teaching my people. And there's that decolonized yoga perspective I talked about before, of where that's something that I know that's unique to us, and that we're probably one of the only studios that talks about yoga from this decolonized perspective. And knowing that we're teaching Black and brown bodies, we know that we're teaching them how to look at themselves and the practice from a view that's indigenous. And we really kind of talk about Kemetic yoga, which is yoga that you can find in Africa or Egypt. We talk about Kinam, which is yoga being developed, but also being synthesized from Mesoamerica, Mesoamerican civilizations, mainly Toltec and Mayan. And so when I developed a part of the teacher training, which was like a history. I give a history module. And so I wanted to teach history from, again, this decolonized view to show that the ancient Indus Valley civilizations, the Kemetic civilizations, and the Mesoamerican, Mayan, and Toltec civilizations all existed in the Bronze Age times. And some coincidence, they all talked about and have hieroglyphs that demonstrate sitting in lotus pose, right? And so people say, oh, those are just scribes. Well, you have to understand that scribes were the mental people. They were the great minds, because to be able to record information, to write, meant to read. And if you're the ones reading, then you're the ones who've got all the information in your head. And so you can see these yogis throughout all of these ancient cultures. And so we know that by the end of the training, you should have a deeper love of who you are, right? Where you may have come from. It's not that you have to walk out of our teacher training and now be taking on the culture of India. You can be taking on your own indigenous culture and now simply be talking about that unity, that love, that alignment. Nobody has the claim on what, again, even Einstein does, which is his great thought experiments. He sits and meditates for hours, and he comes out to explain to us about 14 billion years of history and the universe. And he got all that information inside. That information is inside for all of us. So we are constantly teaching how to access that wisdom from our decolonized modules that teach Kemetic, that demonstrate Kinam, that talk about the actual history of yoga from that decolonized perspective, to where we even talk about the Indus Valley civilization that predates the Vedas. So we can find a lot of some of the things that we still can't read to even know what are the complete origins of this thing that we call yoga. So I know we definitely talk about life from this indigenous perspective that removes the lie of race. It truly now puts in this sense that we're all one family, as shown through DNA. We talk about all these things that are not talked about historically, and I make sure of taking the yamas and niyamas throughout our training. And what that means is actually for every week that someone's in the training, they're working on one of the yamas and niyamas. So by the time you get to the end of the training, we get to the end of the yamas and niyamas, you understand the surrender, and you can see this actual change and effect in your life.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I loved hearing all that, especially when you start talking about the history and how you bring the decolonizing perspective. And that's missing in a lot of the teacher training. I feel like a lot of teacher trainings are it's something we can easily find on YouTube or something, when they talk about history of yoga. And I know, speaking to you or speaking to other teachers who are of South Asian descent, there's more depth to the history than what we typically talk about. And I love that you're bringing different indigenous history and culture to that teacher, to your teacher training. So amazing. So amazing. Definitely. Anybody listening who want to look into the teacher training program at the Tree, I feel like that. And you also do 300, is that correct? Or is that starting?
No, we also do a 300. I'm in the midst of my sequencing module, right? And our 300, it's like with a 300, because it's more piecemeal. There is, right, of course, you're getting sequencing, but still, for me, there's always laying in. I just don't think that you can ever do anything in the training of yoga and not overlay the philosophy and the deeper aspect of, if we're talking about sequencing, me breaking down the 8 limbs in that way to talk about the progression of a class. We're talking about krama vinyasa and even breaking down again the progression of a class. And so in our 300 hours, there's always deepening the understanding of, say, if we're talking about sequencing, but still how to hold that space, how to truly facilitate the entire package and not make it so Instagram-y, right? Of where it's like, how can I do this great pose? It's truly not about doing that great pose. It's the journey of going to that pose. And now what is going to have to take you to purify within yourself, not be attached anymore, to surrender to find a burn in, not be violent with yourself. And so what that journey is, and that's what, in our 300 hour is. And some of it is laid out in a way of same thing, where the philosophy piece is 4 days, and where for me, when you get to that 4th day, you should feel a profound change in how you're being. And it's been designed off of other programs that I've been through within my own life to really have me confront something like I was divorced after 30 years. And so I had to really kind of get to a place to where I wasn't her. And so the work that I've had to do to really kind of get to a point to where I can recognize my role in the part I played in a divorce, and it's not anybody's fault. I bring that kind of work to our trainings, to where, a lot of people thinking they just come in to learn how to do the asanas fuller, and they wind up going like, shit, I didn't expect it to be so much therapy.
And what is your 200-hour teacher training format, and also 300? How long does it take? How often do you meet?
Yeah, our 200-hour, we do 3 times a year. Mm-hmm. And so the spring and the fall are more weekends and a Wednesday. And so it's like 11 weeks now. It was 11 weeks on the weekends and a Wednesday. And so the Wednesday nights again are online, basically, of where this is our philosophy time, to where we have the yamas and niyamas that we kind of go through. I do this outside of our teacher training, and where I call it mental yoga. I take people through a 10-week series. And then our summer program is a scaled down one, where it's just maybe 10 or 11 people. And that's just with me, of where we now just kind of Monday through Friday go through the grueling task of going through our teacher training. And it's basically the same training, just one is an intensive and one is just kind of blown out to be the 3 months.
And your 300-hour teacher training format?
Oh, yeah. And the 300-hour we do in module format, to where they're like 4-day modules. Some of the modules are Mondays and Fridays, so where it's just like 4 days. And that way, we have it to where there's 6 modules and they happen twice a year. And so people they can just take it as continuing education. If you just wanted to deepen your understanding of sequencing, or the philosophy, or advanced asanas, or you can piecemeal them over time. Now have your 6, and then you take our mentoring part of it, to where you spend time with one of the 3 of us who run the 300-hour. And then we mentor you basically on an offering that you can give to the community. And that kind of gives somebody their 300-hour. So where it's not this set thing where they have to run through to run through it like they do with the 200 hour. They get to just kind of be like, all right, I'm going to do this one this month. I'll do this one this month. Maybe I'll skip a month and do another one and then make that up somewhere here. As long as you have like the complete package, then you can take the mentoring and get your 300 that takes you to a 500 hour.
I like that format of, with 300, kind of you can take your time, go at your own pace, taking modules at a time. That's how our 300 was, because I know you finished your 300 with Annie Carpenter's Smart Flow, and you can kind of take the module that works for your schedule and kind of combine 300 hours after, whenever you get to 300.
Yes. I'm blessed to be a student of Annie Carpenter. I definitely would say that my teaching, my practice, it is a product of my teachers. I can point out Lisa Villagomez, who was my first teacher, Lisa Saulners, Damian McVeigh, and my advanced goddess, Annie Carpenter. I definitely would say they've all been these great influences on me as a teacher.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for naming your teachers. That was one of my questions. Who do you consider as your teacher that influenced you? So thank you for naming them. Quite amazing. I just finished assisting her 200-hour teacher training program, and she said it's her last one, but we'll see. Maybe she'll do another one.
It's her last one? Wow. I would have loved to have taken her 200 hour, honestly.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing to see how from the very beginning, she really breaks down all of her movement principles in 200-hour program. So it was very fascinating to see how she runs it. And I was very grateful to be part of it. I learned a lot myself. I feel like I became a better teacher just going through her 200-hour.
Oh yeah, I'm a better teacher every time I talk to Annie.
Yeah. And actually I saw your photos and your name on Annie's website as all of her 300-hour graduates. I saw your photo and I was like, oh my God, yes. So another question I have is accessibility. How do you make your studio and teacher training programs accessible?
Yes, that's I think one of our key things is that accessibility. Having our studio in South LA is one of the main points of accessibility, because it would be so hard, one, for people to have to drive so far out. And if you're talking economics and all of that, that even creates more of a barrier. And so that being in the community to where you don't have things like yoga studios, having classes that are donation based. And so like my Saturday class has always been donation based, meaning that if you have something to give, great. If you don't have anything to give, great. Bring yourself. And that I think is sort of a very important aspect to where even before we were a nonprofit, we had to really get into asking for donations. And then when we turned over to being a for-profit as a cooperative, we still wanted to keep that model of having donation-based classes. And so I think about one class a day is donation based in the studio. Even though we have memberships and things like that, we try and make sure that is the case. And then another way that we are accessible is making sure that we have classes that are designed for all bodies, right? It's something I've posted and I'll say, yoga is not for everyone, but it's for everybody. And so that is where you might not come in and find that level 2 class and whatever, where you start from standing and then you just start moving. All the classes are going to be level 1 or all levels. They're not in the sense of where, we even I would say our power class that happens on Sunday and whatever, it's still accessible. It's just a power class. But I definitely endeavor to teach people who may be just starting out or don't know their bodies in that way. And so you can find a lot of our teachers teaching other body types. And I say that other body types because, again, is looking at yoga publications and things like that. You only see one body being represented.
Thank you for sharing that. I think accessibility is so important, both, barriers to people being able to take the class, but also in the class. So like you said, physically making class accessible. And another thing I really see and notice is that how expensive teacher trainings are out there, and
Oh,
that can be such a barrier to entry for so many people. And I've interviewed a couple yoga teachers who bring teacher training program to community college, which makes the cost much, much smaller. I think it's about $500 to $600 per student, and they take over 2 semesters to finish their 200-hour program. They're
mm,
starting one at LBCC, so Long Beach Community College. They're starting one this month. And then OCC, Orange Coast Community College, has been doing their 200-hour program at their university, or not, at their college, for a few years now. So I think that's another, great way to make teacher training quite accessible. And it's a year long, so they can really take time to learn, and they pay per units or something, and it become much more accessible than paying $3,000-$4,000 for teacher training. So
yes.
yeah, how have you your studio kind of managed that cost of teacher training? Because you do have to make sure the studio stays open.
Definitely. You heard me say earlier, we have a premier yoga studio, meaning that it's not that kind of a small little studio that we once had. And so really having to pay our lease is an important thing. But even as part of the nonprofit, we've always had a cost structure that was accessible. I think we did have to go up in our cost, but originally we were only charging like $1,800, or maybe like $2,000 or something like that. And then we had a scholarship program that cut that in half.
Mm-hmm.
And so we still, in a sense of where I think our teacher training right now is at $2,800, and we still offer a scholarship program that takes $1,000 off of that. And then we have our friends at Nike who at times they will offer scholarships for our students, to where our cohort before last, it was, let me make sure, the scholarships that were given out, they were all full rides. And so I think maybe like 5 or so of those people didn't have to pay for their teacher training at all. We do payment plans to make it accessible in that way. And those are, I think, all the ways that we try and make it so that people can take the training and not feel like it is going to be this kind of crazy hit.
Mm-hmm.
And again, make it at that accessible pricing, because I think we've been around for a bit, so I'm starting to see some people pricing their teacher trainings around ours.
Amazing. And I know that I was able to be part of your studio, because your studio was maybe had some kind of contract or something with the high school in Wilmington, that you bring teachers to Wilmington High School to teach a yoga class for their students. So how often do you have these kind of projects, or that's outside of the studio? And maybe these are like a certain temporary contract you have. How much of that do you have at the studio?
Oh man, Jenny Alvarez is our outreach coordinator, and so she just does a magnificent job of really being able to do outreach, to where we have partnerships with Grand Park and downtown LA. So like this sometime this coming week, we'll be going and facilitating this kind of whole, day long thing happening in downtown LA. We work with Councilman Marquise. I'm gonna ruin his name, but he's a council member, District 8, to where in the summertime we teach kids in the parks and whatever. It's like kind of a program of where kids who are now out of school, they get to kind of learn yoga and the different things. So we have partnerships with them where we teach around the community. We have a contract in the Annenberg Center in the Wilshire District, where we teach chair yoga to I'm trying to think of the PC word that you say, because now seniors is not necessarily as PC, but basically we teach to seniors. And so there's a bunch of different contracts that we have, and we're constantly getting hit up in the sense because I think we're one of the few places where you can go and get Black and brown yoga teachers. So if you want to kind of have that type of representation for students, for other companies who may be whatever, then they kind of come to us to have that type of outreach. And so even the school is another contract that we are fortunate enough to continue to be rewarded with year after year. So there's even too many to count because they continue to come in and people are asking us to do more and more.
That's so amazing because as a studio, you get to bring your work not only to the community surrounding the studios, but even further out. The reach is bigger. So I
Yes.
yeah, that's amazing. And the fact that this contract, you're able to receive money to pay teacher, the fair wage to go to these areas to teach. So I think that's so amazing.
Yes, that's a big part of it, of us being a worker owner cooperative. And so like, I do the teacher trainings, I teach my classes and whatever, and I own the studio in that way. And so we know as people getting paid for our work, the importance of that kind of fair equity as paying our teachers and giving platforms to more Black and brown teachers is sort of the point of it, so that now we can be a hub to where we're hiring Black and brown yoga teachers as opposed to these teachers trying to go to studios where they may not be seen as valued or honored as actual yogis because they don't have that certain look.
Yeah, it's so important. And it's so important for many students to be able to see a teacher and be like, oh, that somebody who look like them, that to know that like, oh, I can be a teacher too. Like I can be that person. I can take the teacher training. And yeah, I think representation is huge.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And another question I have is, now that you said you are much more involved in the studios but you said you still work as well. And in the beginning, I think you said you were volunteering your time. You're driving 1 hour every Saturday to teach a class. Now, do you feel like you're able to get compensated for a lot of the times and energy you put in? Do you feel comfortable as a teacher with the income that you make through it?
Yes, I feel comfortable as a teacher with that income, but I would say, and it is just always honest as somebody who runs teacher trainings. I try and make sure people know that there is work to be done in order to be compensated in a way to where you can make a living off of being a teacher. I think people see folks go in and they're like these teachers and they see all the folks in the room, but they don't really get that that's the studio and all of that. And so I'll say that the difference today is that I teach and I train, and the trainings can pay me a better wage, if you will, than just the teaching. And I'm somebody, I only teach 2 classes. A lot of teachers that may teach like 5 or 6 classes a week or so on and so forth to kind of help manage that. And so because I always knew that, as I said, those people having those conversations, the training was always sort of what I aspired to do. And so it's that piece I really speak to say that allows me to be a full-time yogi. If I didn't do the trainings and I just taught, then I think like what we find with a lot of yoga teachers is that being a yoga teacher is a side gig. And that's just the real of it. I think a lot of us teach, and I know I really taught in the beginning because yoga was so expensive. I don't want to be paying for all the classes I wanted to take. And so I taught a class so that I could get free yoga class.
I can definitely relate to that. It's like, if I work for this studio or this gym, I get a free membership. Yeah, no, definitely. And, I still are grateful for places that I work that I can go there to work out or take classes for as part of the perks of teaching yoga. But thank you for that transparency, the honesty of teaching trainings is what is allowing you to be a full-time teacher. And I have, with this podcast, I've interviewed many teachers who do teach 25, 30 classes a week to make it work, to make a living. And I don't think it's sustainable. It might be okay now, but I don't think, over the next 5, 10 years, I don't think it's sustainable to be teaching that many yoga group classes per week. So it's true. I think it is helpful to have training, or maybe some people, maybe it's a retreat that they lead, or maybe it's a workshop that they lead, another streams of income, yoga related or not, to kind of make it work. Yeah. So thank you for
Yes, I would definitely say that, and just my experience, because now as a 53-year-old Black man, I damn sure couldn't be teaching 25 classes a week. I have no hair to pull out, so I would just be like ripping my skin off. But what I would say for just anyone listening is that you should be teaching your class and using your class to funnel your students into the other streams of income. Right. And so it's like I can definitely say a lot of the students that I get for my teacher trainings, from my workshops, for our other workshops that happen at the studio, is that they come to the class and they, like me, probably most like you kind of get hooked, and now you want more. And so having those kind of other things to kind of take people through, I think are the things that make it sustainable. And so your class should be of where, you should not be fighting for the most amount of money in that. You should be fighting for the most amount of people. And so now you can maybe pull out 10 folks from a 35-person class and whatever. And now those 10 folks will pay you for whatever workshops, trainings, other offerings that you have. That's what I've seen in my career.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with you on that. So looking back at your journey of being a yoga teacher and where you are now, what are some mistakes you made along the way that you wish you knew earlier, or maybe you learned something from that you can pass on to the listeners?
I mean, you wish you knew it all earlier. um, I, I think if anything, of really having to get that everything builds over time. I think as teachers, we kind of rate success on students in the room. And so if something I had to say of where I sort of kind of walked into kind of a ready-made class when I was at the yoga den, and then that class sort of diminished as I was a new teacher, and I was like, oh my God, and so I'm like beating myself up of when I might have, had like 1 week I might have had 6 people, and the next week I might have had 5 people. And I'm like, oh my God, I lost a person, and so on and so forth. And so I definitely say not taking it so personal, getting that you're learning, you're building. And the more you do something, the better you get at it, to where now it's kind of like more secondhand, to where before I would go and I would be like, how many people are even going to be there? To now it's like, let me go and have the yoga class of the city. Right. And I'm saying that here in LA, which is, yoga Mecca. And it's an arrogant thing to say, but it's really a settled thing to say, to where I know what it is that I'm going to go and bring to my students. And so I think that there's really learning that, and that you're really kind of holding space for people, as opposed to thinking like, oh, I got to do the right asanas in the right order to give them the right class, as opposed to give them a place of where they can honestly rest and be themselves.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. And was there any particular turning point in your teaching career that made a huge impact or influenced your path?
I think the major change was to come down and teach at the Tree. It was one, because I kind of sort of entered the yoga world of what it was, and so I was used to a lot of strong yogis that knew whatever, and going to Bhakti Fest and doing all whatever. And so even the yoga class I was holding, everybody was strong, and they kind of already knew. And so having to leave that and come to South Central LA, it basically put me at square one. to where now I really had to learn bodies. I really had to really be thinking about alignment and safety in a way because everybody wasn't as strong or used to these asanas. So that really had me reshape my teaching style. And like I said, start from ground zero because it's so easy to teach all of us yogis who know all I got to do is call out a bunch of poses, right? But in a room full of people who don't know what you're talking about, then it has to be a lot more simple, a lot more basic, and you have to be patient, right? Like I could probably do 4 or 5 different warriors, if you will, in my sequence as I was teaching out and whatever. And that's still just like a chill class. And when I got to South Central, I might have been able to get away with like 3 or so because it was a slower build and peak and coming down.
Yeah, so true. I think similar to you, when I first graduated from 200 Hour, I started working at gold gyms or community centers. And soon I realized that I had to scale it back. Some people can't just step through from down dog and, go into warrior one. And some people didn't feel very comfortable doing down dog or couldn't do down dog. So really scaling it back and learning how to sequence in a way that can allow everybody in the room to be able to practice together, that really made me a better teacher because I went through that experience versus if I would have just straight went into yoga studio and started teaching at a yoga studio and only taught to bodies who already knew what they were doing, who were fit and bendy, flexible, able-bodied, then I wouldn't have learned, become the teacher that I am now. So definitely made a huge impact and made my teaching, it improved my teaching, but also have more empathy to all the bodies and, that to make yoga truly accessible, I think it's so important. I think definitely teaching not only to quote unquote advanced student, I think it's such a gift that as a teacher that we learn so much from.
Yes.
And another question I have is what aspects of being a full-time yoga teacher do you love the most? And what do you find it most challenging?
I'm a spoiled brat. I'm a spoiled brat. My life is set in a way to where the challenging piece is like the challenging thing to answer. I'll say that the thing I like the most is giving people permission to rest. Is like one is what I always call is like yoga is sneaky. And so, I see me having to take people on a hike and like, you taking them up the hike and they get up there, you see it in their face like, oh my God. And for me, that's always the fun part because I see them like, what are we doing? Like, oh my God, like here. And then we get to that peak and I know like that benefit of that peak is now because they're going to have that permission to truly come down and let their bodies go. And so now, as I'm watching them go through this process of where the Shavasana is this truly like, oh, I'm done. I'm really like free and loose. And just damn sure from a black and brown perspective of people who have been down and out in the society, to see my people rest, to see them have that permission to not have to worry about a bill that's due in a month, right? Or if what I did yesterday was right or wrong, but I can just truly enjoy this moment. And like there's moments of having to fight back tears, of really seeing people just in that true sense of release. That's my favorite part. Challenging, I would probably say is just more in the sense of business now. In this, there's always wanting to make the business work, of trying to find that balance of this love of what you do, but yet still this sustainability of yourself and your business. I think walking that fine line has probably been our biggest challenge, of where we wanted to be kumbaya, but yet we still have to make sure that ends meet, if you will. As a full-time yogi, I'm not, and I probably have never been what a lot of full-time yogis are and what they've had to go through. Like as a Nike trainer, Nike brought us together with a bunch of different yogis and whatever and different athletes from all over. And so it's not even just yoga. And I can see how all these young people were having to teach these tons of classes to just make it. And so if I was coming from that standpoint, I would definitely say the sustainability on the body and all that, as far as being a yoga teacher. What I tell my trainees is that the biggest challenge is mistaking your teaching for your practice. That people now begin to teach so much to get paid that they start neglecting their own practice. And it's easy to fall into that headspace of money and all the matrix stuff and then get injured, because the thing that was keeping you healthy was the thing you're teaching other people to do, the thing you're no longer doing yourself. So that's, I think, the most I could give.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's so true. Well, we get so busy that we forget about our own practice. And when we stop practicing, I feel like you just can't show up as your fullest self to teach, especially if you're exhausted from teaching that many classes a week. So definitely that's a great tip. And when you talked about your business, it brought another question, that how has it been a challenging to balance business side of your work, and making sure the studio is running and can stay open, and also being a teacher? That I feel like that's a two role that could be slightly different. And also, like, your personal life, has it been difficult to set a boundary with your business and teaching and your work? How have you been juggling those responsibilities?
Yeah, I definitely say, because yoga is a lifestyle. And I'm kind of being that full-time yogi, that my friends are yogis. And so my friends can be students, if you will. And so there's always being mindful of that. And it's nothing I've really had a problem with yet. It's just something I can kind of see, of where if there's somebody that I'm hanging out with and whatever, and they're also part of the studio, right, does that kind of create that conflict, because they have to be paying their membership, if you will, to be coming to the studio. I really haven't had that piece of it, because I mean, it's usually like, well, you're friends with the owner, so you might get a discount or something. Personal life. Yeah, I'll say right now there is no personal life. There is all of business, sort of like my friendships, my family, where it's all sort of a kind of the business. But I'll take that back. I do have a bit of a personal life where I get to kind of hang out. Again, I'm spoiled. I probably, my busiest times that I work is I teach a Tuesday night class. I teach a Saturday morning class, right? It's like just those two classes, hour and a half. From there, there's the teacher trainings, where those might be 8 hours each day, Saturday and Sunday, and maybe 3 or 4 hours on a Wednesday. And so I have a lot of free time, honestly, to do things of maybe getting some business work done that actually I'm not doing so much of. But there is that piece of it. But I get an opportunity, because I get paid to take care of myself. And so, like, being able to go out on walks, do yoga in the park, do stuff like that, like, students expect you to be an embodiment of what the yoga life is. So I get a nice little kind of work-life balance in the fact that my lifestyle is also my work. So it's kind of like a all around question. I just think the balancing really kind of comes in is in the sense of partnership, where there's four of us. There's always trying to, maintain and be on that same page and keep the business kind of moving. But there's just, I think, always sort of those challenges that we use this kind of lifestyle and this work to kind of get us beyond.
Thank you for sharing that. And I just have last two questions for you. What does success mean to you as a full-time yoga teacher?
It puts a smile on my face, because I taught last night, and one of my students comes over to me. And she's like, I've been coming to you for like maybe about 7 months or 8 months now. And now I feel so much stronger. And I feel I have this ability to do this, and I have this ability to do that. And so to see students, in love with themselves, having that sense of overcoming and finding that strength and empowering themselves, that's success for me. Students walking out with that yoga drunk, I can tell you, like, I'll sit downstairs and watch everybody come down, and you see them kind of with that kind of like dreary look in their face, and they slowly walking down. And so that when I see my students walk out with that very first thing that hooked me, and hearing that progression, those are the things that really kind of light my fire, that make me feel like that's being a successful yoga teacher.
Yes, thank you. I love that. And where do you see your yoga teaching career path going? Some people don't like to use the word goal, but it doesn't have to be goal. But where are you headed? And where do you want to go?
Ooh, where am I headed? I'm headed to be Annie Carpenter.
Yeah.
I'm I'm somebody who, in a sense of sees apprenticeship. And so, like, the yogi I am today was based off of my first yoga teacher, Lisa Villa Gomez, who had the Yoga Den Health Spa. And so that was what I would see for myself, of doing teacher trainings, workshops, having my own studio. And so that was sort of that visioning that I had. And so my great mentor that I see is definitely Annie, of being a yoga teacher, where that I can travel and teach what I have now honed in as my understanding of the practice. And so it's like, even as I developed this understanding of decolonized yoga, I do this philosophy module of where I give visuals to really kind of help break down the complexities of what we're talking about and what we're working on. And so, like, being able to offer that, I've been able to go to different festivals and places and offer that module. And so, being that teacher to where I just get paid to travel and teach this stuff that is unique to me, and because I have the time in, I could be in demand in that way, and so I could always just kind of live this lifestyle and get paid to do it.
Yes, I love that. Definitely seeing someone like Annie Carpenter, or also a teacher, Julius Lassiter. And she recently said she's been teaching for 50 something years now. So it's beautiful to be able to see somebody who's have walked the path and who is still, doing what they love. And also you, for me, like, you've been teaching longer than me. So for me to be able to see you, doing what you love and continue to do so. And now you said traveling more and teach, that's I think it's important for yoga teachers like me or anybody listening to see the different path and also see that it's possible. So thank you for sharing all of your stories and your journey. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you want to say to the listener? And I'll ask you where they can find you next, but anything from the, I don't know, interview that you want to go back and say one more time, or anything I didn't ask that you want to highlight?
I think in the sense of the only thing I would highlight is just still the truth of the practice is, what I teach is that yoga from that sense of really kind of catching that you kind of live in this Play-Doh that we call life. And Play-Doh, I don't know if you raised as a kid, we had this stuff that you can kind of mold into whatever shape that you want. And so our lives are sort of like that, where we can mold it into whatever shape we want. And so yoga teaches us to come from that place of that middle of that calm, to where now we can really be directing it from a place of knowing, as opposed to where we're used to being in our emotions. And so if I'm in my emotions, then I'm in my assumptions, I'm in my story, and I'm shaping my life based on that. And that's not necessarily this knowing, as much as it's just kind of an unconscious way of being. And if it's anything that I recommend, or I say why folks should do this yoga, is so that it teaches us how to be able to shift back into neutral, look at where it is that we need to go, and now plot our way forward in a more conscious way. That's I think the thing that kind of got me into this, the thing that really made me a spiritual individual, to really get that, you're the creator of your life. And these practices to teach you to be more mindful, it just teaches you to pay attention to where you're walking, pay attention to how you're being, pay attention to you.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for that wisdom. And tell the listeners how they can find you, how they can reach you, or any upcoming, trainings or offerings you have.
Definitely, you can reach me and all of my partners I've mentioned at the Tree Yoga Co-op. That's the Tree Yoga coop.org. You can find us on our website there. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook. And any questions that you may have as far as what our upcoming teacher trainings are, the next one starts in summer at the end of June, because July is the main part of it. And you can also find me individually at 10th Letter Yoga, 10th Letter Yoga. That's my handle on Instagram. And as you see, this yoga geek, as I was a computer geek, I love talking this. And so I'm always down to answer anybody's questions or take this any further that they would like to.
Thank you so much. And I'll make sure I'll link all of that to the show notes. And Josh, thank you so much for your time. And it's been such a pleasure getting to know your journey. And I think the work you're doing and your whole studio is doing, it's so amazing. And I believe and I know that it's making a huge impact on so many people's lives. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Rega.
I hope this conversation was insightful, inspiring, and uplifting to you. I really enjoyed having this conversation with Ja. I could really tell from this conversation how much he loves the tree and how much work and passion and love and sweat goes into running that studio. His 200 hours teacher training program, as well as 300-hour teacher training program, sounds amazing. So if you are in South Central LA area, if you live near it or you drive past it, I highly, highly recommend go check out his studio or even his trainings or workshops. They have a lot of amazing offerings that you should definitely look into. That is it for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this podcast, please rate, review on whatever platform you're listening to. You can always message me on Instagram or through my website to tell me what has inspired you or what episode you really enjoyed, or even if you have a teacher that you want me to interview or you yourself want to be interviewed for the podcast, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I would love to hear from you. And I love hearing from the listeners about what they thought about the interviews and how they liked it, how it inspired you. So just don't hesitate, reach out anytime. I love hearing from the listeners. My Instagram is @Reika Yoga and my website is www.reikayoga.com. I hope to hear from you soon and I will speak to you next week. Bye.